Section 22 of Library of the World's Best Literature, Ancient and Modern, Volume 1. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Patty Cunningham. Library of the World's Best Literature, Ancient and Modern, Volume 1, Section 22. Selected Fables by Aesop. Aesop, 7th century B.C., by Harry Thurston Peck. Like Homer, the greatest of the world's epic poets, Aesop, Aesopus, the most famous of the world's fabulists, has been regarded by certain scholars as a wholly mythical personage. The many improbable stories that are told about him gain some credence for this theory, which is set forth in detail by the Italian scholar Vico, who says, Aesop, regarded philosophically, will be found not to have been an actually existing man, but rather an abstraction representing a class. In other words, merely a convenient invention of the later Greeks, who ascribed to him all the fables of which they could find no certain author. The only narrative upon which the ancient writers are in the main agreed represents Aesop as living in the 7th century before Christ. As with Homer, so with Aesop. Several cities of Asia Minor claimed the honor of having been his birthplace. Born a slave and hideously ugly, his keen wit led his admiring master to set him free, after which he traveled, visiting Athens, where he is said to have told his fable of King Log and King Stork to the citizens who were complaining of the rule of Pisistratus. Still later, having won the favor of King Croesus of Lydia, he was sent by him to Delphi with a gift of money for the citizens of that place, but in the course of a dispute as to its distribution, he was slain by the Delphians, who threw him over a precipice. The fables that bore his name seem not to have been committed by him to writing, but for a long time were handed down from generation to generation by oral tradition, so that the same fables are sometimes found quoted in slightly different forms, and we hear of men learning them in conversation rather than from books. They were, however, universally popular. Socrates, while in prison, amused himself by turning some of them into verse. Aristophanes cites them in his plays, and he tells how certain suitors once tried to win favor of a judge by repeating to him some of the amusing stories of Aesop. The Athenians even erected a statue in his honor. At a later period, the fables were gathered together and published by the Athenian statesman and orator Demetrius Phalereus in B.C. 320, and were versified by Babrius, of uncertain date, whose collection is the only one in Greek of which any substantial portion still survives. They were often translated by the Romans, and the Latin version by Phaedrus, the freedman of Augustus Caesar, is still preserved and still used as a school book. 42 of them are likewise found in a Latin work by one Avanius, dating from the 5th century after Christ. During the Middle Ages, when much of the classical literature had been lost or forgotten, Aesop, who was called by the medievals Aesopet, was still read in various forms, and in modern times he has served as a model for a great number of imitations, of which the most successful are those in French by La Fontaine and those in English by John Gay. Whether or not such a person as Aesop ever lived, and whether or not he actually narrated the fables that are ascribed to him, it is certain that he did not himself invent them, but merely gave them currency in Greece, for they can be shown to have existed long before his time, and in fact to antedate even the beginnings of Hellenic civilization. With some changes of form, they are found in the oldest literature of the Chinese. Similar stories are preserved on the inscribed Babylonian bricks, and an Egyptian papyrus of about the year 1200 B.C. gives the fable of the lion and the mouse in its finished form. Other Aesopic apologues are essentially identical with the Jatakas, or Buddhist stories of India, and occur also in the great Sanskrit story book, the Panchatantra, which is the very oldest monument of Hindu literature. The so-called Aesopic fables are in fact only a part of the primitive folklore that springs up in prehistoric times, and passes from country to country and from race to race by the process of popular storytelling. They reached Greece undoubtedly through Egypt and Persia, and even in their present form they still retain certain Oriental, or at any rate non-Hellenic, elements, such as the introduction of Eastern animals, the panther, the peacock, and the ape. They represent the beginnings of conscious literary effort, when man first tried to enforce some maxim of practical wisdom and to teach some useful truth through the fascinating medium of a story. The fable embodies a half-unconscious desire to give concrete form to an abstract principle, and a childish love for the picturesque and striking, which endows rocks and stones and trees with life, and gives the power of speech to animals. That beasts with the attributes of human beings should figure in these tales involves, from the standpoint of primeval man, only a very slight divergence from probability. In nothing, perhaps, has civilization so changed us as in our mental attitude toward animals. It has fixed a great gulf between us and them, a gulf far greater than that which divided them from our first ancestors. In the early ages of the world, when men lived by the chase and gnawed the raw flesh of their prey and slept in lairs amid the jungle, the purely animal virtues were the only ones they knew and exercised. They adored courage and strength, and swiftness and endurance. They respected keenness of scent and vision, and admired cunning. The possession of these qualities was the very condition of existence, and they valued them accordingly, but in each one of them they found their equals, and in fact their superiors, among the brutes. A lion was stronger than the strongest man. The hare was swifter. The eagle was more keen-sighted. The fox was more cunning. Hence, so far from looking down upon the animals from the remotely superior height that 100 centuries of civilization have erected for us, the primitive savage looked up to the beast, studied his ways, copied him, and went to school to him. The man, then, was not in those days the lord of creation, and the beast was not his servant, but they were almost brothers in the subtle sympathy between them, like that which united Mowgli, the wolf-nursed shikari, and his hairy brethren in that most weirdly wonderful of all Mr. Kipling's inventions, the one that carries us back, not as his other stories do, to the India of the cities and the bazaars, of the supercilious tourist and the sleek baboo, but to the older India of unbroken jungle, darkling at noonday through its green mist of tangled leaves, and haunted by memories of the world's long infancy, when man and brute crouched close together on the earthly breast of the Great Mother. The Aesopic fables, then, are the oldest representative that we have of the literary art of primitive man. The charm that they have always possessed springs in part from their utter simplicity, their naivete, and their directness, and in part from the fact that their teachings are the teachings of universal experience, and therefore appeal irresistibly to the consciousness of everyone who hears them, whether he be savage or scholar, child or sage. They are the literary antipodes of the last great effort of genius and art working upon the same material, and found in Mr. Kipling's Jungle Books. The fables show only the first stirrings of the literary instinct. The jungle stories bring to bear the full development of the fictive art, creative imagination, psychological insight, brilliantly picturesque description, and the touch of one who is a daring master of vivid language, so that no better theme can be given to a student of literary history than the critical comparison of these two allied forms of composition, representing as they do the two extremes of actual development. The best general account in English of the origin of the Greek fable is that of Rutherford in the introduction to his Babrius (London, 1883). An excellent special study of the history of the Aesopic fables is that by Joseph Jacobs in the first volume of his Aesop (London, 1889). The various ancient accounts of Aesop's life are collected by Simrock in Aesop's Leben (1864). The best scientific edition of the 210 fables is that of Halm (Leipzig, 1887). Good disquisitions on their history during the Middle Ages are those of Duméral in French, Paris, 1854, and Bruno in German, Bamberg, 1892. See also the articles in the present work under the titles Babrius, Bidpai, John Gay, La Fontaine, Lockman, Panchatantra, Phaedrus, Reynard the Fox. The Fox and the Lion. The first time the Fox saw the Lion, he fell down at his feet, and was ready to die of fear. The second time, he took courage, and could even bear to look upon him. The third time, he had the impudence to come up to him, to salute him, and to enter into familiar conversation with him. The Ass in the Lion's Skin. An Ass, finding the skin of a lion, put it on, and, going into the woods and pastures, threw all the flocks and herds into a terrible consternation. At last, meeting his owner, he would have frightened him also, but the good man, seeing his long ears stick out, presently knew him, and with a good cudgel made him sensible that, notwithstanding his being dressed in a lion's skin, he was really no more than an ass. The Ass Eating Thistles. An Ass was loaded with good provisions of several sorts, which in time of harvest he was carrying into the field for his master and the reapers to dine upon. On the way he met with a fine large thistle, and being very hungry, began to mumble it; which, while he was doing, he entered into this reflection: How many greedy epicures would think themselves happy amidst such a variety of delicate viands as I now carry! But to me this bitter prickly thistle is more savoury and relishing than the most exquisite and sumptuous banquet. The Wolf in Sheep's Clothing. A Wolf, clothing himself in the skin of a sheep, and getting in among the flock, by this means took the opportunity to devour many of them. At last the shepherd discovered him, and, cunningly fastening a rope about his neck, tied him up to a tree which stood hard by. Some other shepherds, happening to pass that way, and observing what he was about, drew near and expressed their admiration at it. "What!" says one of them, "brother, do you make a hanging of a sheep?" "No," replied the other, "but I make a hanging of a wolf whenever I catch him, though in the habit and garb of a sheep." Then he showed them their mistake, and they applauded the justice of the execution. The Countryman and the Snake. A villager, in a frosty, snowy winter, found a snake under a hedge, almost dead with cold. He could not help having a compassion for the poor creature, so brought it home, and laid it upon the hearth near the fire. But it had not lain there long, before, being revived with the heat, it began to erect itself and fly at his wife and children, filling the whole cottage with dreadful hissings. The Countryman heard an outcry, and perceiving what the matter was, catched up a mattock and soon dispatched him, upbraiding him at the same time in these words: "Is this, vile wretch, the reward you make to him that saved your life? Die as you deserve, but a single death is too good for you." The Belly and the Members. In former days, when the belly and the other parts of the body enjoyed the faculty of speech, and had separate views and designs of their own, each part, it seems, in particular for himself, and in the name of the whole, took exception to the conduct of the belly, and were resolved to grant him supplies no longer. They said they thought it very hard that he should lead an idle, good-for-nothing life, spending and squandering away upon his own ungodly guts all the fruits of their labour, and that, in short, they were resolved for the future to strike off his allowance, and let him shift for himself as well as he could. The hands protested they would not lift up a finger to keep him from starving, and the mouth wished he might never speak again if he took in the least bit of nourishment for him as long as he lived. And, said the teeth, may we be rotten if ever we chew a morsel for him for the future. This solemn league and covenant was kept as long as anything of that kind can be kept, which was until each of the rebel members pined away to skin and bone, and could hold out no longer. Then they found there was no doing without the belly, and that idle and insignificant as he seemed, he contributed as much to the maintenance and welfare of all the other parts as they did to his. The Satyr and the Traveller. A Satyr, as he was ranging the forest in an exceeding cold, snowy season, met with a traveller half starved with the extremity of the weather. He took compassion on him, and kindly invited him home to a warm, comfortable cave he had in a hollow of a rock. As soon as they had entered and sat down, notwithstanding there was a good fire in the place, the chilly traveller could not forbear blowing his fingers' ends. Upon the Satyr's asking why he did so, he answered that he did it to warm his hands. The honest Sylvan, having seen little of the world, admired a man who was master of so valuable a quality as that of blowing heat, and therefore was resolved to entertain him in the best manner he could. He spread the table before him with dried fruits of several sorts, and produced a remnant of cold wine, which, as the rigour of the season made very proper, he mulled with some warm spices infused over the fire, and presented to his shivering guest. But this the traveller thought fit to blow likewise, and upon the Satyr's demanding a reason why he blowed again, he replied to cool his dish. This second answer provoked the Satyr's indignation as much as the first had kindled his surprise; so taking the man by the shoulder, he thrust him out of doors, saying he would have nothing to do with a wretch who had so vile a quality as to blow hot and cold with the same mouth. The Lion and the Other Beasts. The Lion and several other beasts entered into an alliance, offensive and defensive, and were to live very sociably together in the forest. One day, having made a sort of an excursion by way of hunting, they took a very fine, large, fat deer, which was divided into 4 parts, there happening to be then present His Majesty the Lion and only 3 others. After the division was made and the parts were set out, His Majesty, advancing forward some steps and pointing to one of the shares, was pleased to declare himself after the following manner: "This I seize and take possession as of my right, which devolves to me, as I am described by a true lineal hereditary succession from the royal family of Lion. That," pointing to the second, "I claim by, I think, no unreasonable demand, considering that all the engagements you have with the enemy turn chiefly upon my courage and conduct, and you very well know that wars are too expensive to be carried on without proper supplies. Then," nodding his head toward the third, "that I shall take, by virtue of my prerogative, to which I make no question but so dutiful and loyal a people will pay all the deference and regard that I can desire. Now, as for the remaining part, the necessity of our present affairs is so very urgent, our stock so low, and our credit so impaired and weakened, that I must insist upon your granting that without any hesitation or demur, and hereof fail not at your peril." The Ass and the Little Dog. The Ass, observing how great a favourite the little dog was with his master, how much caressed and fondled, and fed with good bits at every meal, and for no other reason as he could perceive, but for skipping and frisking about, wagging his tail, and leaping up into his master's lap, he was resolved to imitate the same, and see whether such a behaviour would not procure him the same favours. Accordingly, the master was no sooner come home from walking about his fields and gardens, and was seated in his easy chair, but the Ass, who observed him, came gambolling and braying towards him in a very awkward manner. The master could not help laughing aloud at the odd sight; but his jest was soon turned into earnest, when he felt the rough salute of the Ass's forefeet, who, raising himself up on his hinder legs, pawed against his breast with a most loving air, and would fain have jumped into his lap. The good man, terrified at this outrageous behaviour, and unable to endure the weight of so heavy a beast, cried out; upon which, one of his servants, running in with a good stick, and laying on heartily upon the bones of the poor Ass, soon convinced him that every one who desires it is not qualified to be a favourite. The Country Mouse and the City Mouse. An honest, plain, sensible country mouse is said to have entertained at his hole one day a fine mouse of the town. Having formerly been playfellows together, They were old acquaintances, which served as an apology for the visit. However, as master of the house, he thought himself obliged to do the honours of it in all respects, and to make as great a stranger of his guest as he possibly could. In order to do this, he set before him a reserve of delicate grey peas and bacon, a dish of fine oatmeal, some parings of new cheese, and to crown all with a dessert, a remnant of a charming mellow apple. In good manners, he forbore to eat any himself, lest the stranger should not have enough; but that he might seem to bear the other company, sat and nibbled a piece of a wheaten straw very busily. At last said the spark of the town, "Old crony, give me leave to be a little free with you. How can you bear to live in this nasty, dirty, melancholy hole here, with nothing but woods and meadows and mountains, and rivulets about you? Do not you prefer the conversation of the world to the chirping of birds, and the splendour of a court to the rude aspect of an uncultivated desert? Come, take my word for it, you will find it a change for the better. Never stand considering, but away this moment. Remember, we are not immortal, and therefore have no time to lose. Make sure of to-day, and spend it as agreeably as you can. You know not what may happen to-morrow." In short, these and such like arguments prevailed, and his country acquaintance was resolved to go to town that night. So they both set out upon their journey together, proposing to sneak in after the close of the evening. They did so, and about midnight made their entry into a certain great house, where there had been an extraordinary entertainment the day before, and several titbits, which some of the servants had purloined, were hid under the seat of a window. The country guest was immediately placed in the midst of a rich Persian carpet, and now it was the courtier's turn to entertain, who, indeed, acquitted himself in that capacity with the utmost readiness and address, changing the courses as elegantly, and tasting everything first as judiciously, as any clerk of the kitchen. The other sat and enjoyed himself like a delighted epicure, tickled to the last degree with this new turn of his affairs, when on a sudden a noise of somebody opening the door made them start from their seats, and scuttle in confusion about the dining-room. Our country friend, in particular, was ready to die with fear at the barking of a huge mastiff or two, which opened their throats just about the same time, and made the whole house echo. At last recovering himself, "Well," says he, "if this be your town life, much good may you do with it. Give me my poor quiet hole again, with my homely but comfortable grey peas." The Dog and the Wolf. A lean, hungry, half-starved wolf happened, one moonshiny night, to meet with a jolly, plump, well-fed mastiff; and after the first compliments were passed, says the wolf, "You look extremely well. I protest I think I never saw a more graceful, comely person. But how comes it about, I beseech you, that you should live so much better than I? I may say without vanity that I venture 50 times more than you do, and yet I am almost ready to perish with hunger." The Dog answered very bluntly, "Why, you may live as well, if you will do the same for it that I do." "Indeed, what is that?" says he. "Why," says the Dog, "only to guard the house o' nights, and keep it from thieves." "With all my heart," replies the Wolf, "for at present I have but a sorry time of it, and I think to change my hard lodging in the woods, where I endure rain, frost, and snow, for a warm roof over my head, and a belly full of good victuals, which will be no bad bargain." "True," says the Dog; "therefore you have nothing more to do but to follow me." Now as they were jogging on together, the Wolf spied a crease in the Dog's neck, and having a strange curiosity, could not forbear asking him what it meant. "Pooh! nothing," says the Dog. "Nay, but pray," says the Wolf. "Why," says the Dog, "if you must know, I am tied up in the daytime, because I am a little fierce, for fear I should bite people, and am only let loose o' nights. But this is done with design to make me sleep o' days, more than anything else, and that I may watch the better in the night time; for as soon as ever the twilight appears, out I am turned, and may go where I please. Then my master brings me plates of bones from the table with his own hands, and whatever scraps are left by any of the family, all fall to my share. for you must know I am a favourite with everybody, so you see how you are to live. Come along. What is the matter with you?" "No," replied the Wolf, "I beg your pardon. Keep your happiness all to yourself. Liberty is the word with me, and I would not be a king upon the terms you mention." Section 23. Recording by Patty Cunningham.